Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. I'd like to apologize for not having my usual intro that I play for the beginning of the show. However, like I think I mentioned a couple shows back, I've merged Paranormal Palace Radio with Talk Now Radio, and I haven't got the new intro made for Talk Now yet, so we may do a couple shows without that. However, moving right along. Oh, wait, before I forget, also, everybody, if y'all like to call in and ask questions, the number's 832-632-7904. And today, my guest is going to be Frank Joseph. We're going to talk about his, at least to my knowledge, most recent book, Before Atlantis, 20 Million Years of Human and Pre-Human Cultures. I've had the time to actually read this book in full myself, folks, and I could not go back and retrace every culture and everything he put about each and every culture through there. I can mainly come up with a pretty fair summary because there's just so much information in this here that you couldn't get it all in one, setting. It's too many details in it, in other words, many details. So you definitely want to read this more than once. I'd recommend it for your bookshelf rather than e-Kindle, but it would work either way. Frank, is this book in e-Kindle?
Yes, they do have a Kindle version of it. I think if it isn't out now, it will be out shortly.
Okay, just wanted to check with that and make sure because I knew I just said that. Also, Frank, why don't you go ahead and give us the link to the upcoming conference you said you got going on in the near future?
Well, it's not too near. It's next September 21st. And there's going to be a really interesting conference being held. Not really a conference, it's the opening of a brand new museum in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I've been invited to make a presentation there, and along with Dr. Stanton Friedman, who is, in my estimation, the world's leading scholar on UFOs.
I would tend to agree.
The most responsible presenter, a very brilliant man, and I'm very honored to be able to share the platform with Dr. Friedman. That'll be on September 21st in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Anyone that's interested in that, they can go to our website. It's www.ancientmysteriesinternational.com. All one case, a lower case, one word.
Okay. Yeah, I've had Stanton on my show for a couple of times, and when it comes to modern-day ufology and anything since Roswell, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find somebody that knows anything more about it than him.
Oh, he's just, I think, amongst the very best. There are some wonderful presenters on the UFO phenomena, and I don't want to name any more names, but he's my favorite. I mean, his academic background is so impressive, and his presentations themselves are very thought-provoking for anybody that keeps an open mind on this subject.
I am a little curious that he's going to be speaking at this museum because, unless I'm just making a wrong assumption, this is more toward ancient mysteries, and his forte is more UFOs. It's a little off subject from his norm, isn't it? Or maybe you can fill us in on what this...
Well, it's very strange. There have been several symposiums like... Go ahead, Royce, yes. Royce, you were saying? Hello?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
Oh, yes. I thought we lost contact there. No, actually, it's not as unusual as it seems because, there is... Strangely enough, there is a sort of coalescence of some information that links a deeper appreciation of the human past with this phenomenon now referred to as ufology, and especially because I can tell you as a historian that I'm aware of more than traditions, actual reports and the imperial records of ancient Egypt, going back all the way to Sesostris III, who was a very great pharaoh, who, about 4,000 years ago, launched an invasion of Syria, and during that invasion, his military report reads almost like a UFO report of some of the things they saw. They refer to them not as flying saucers, but as flaming shields that were seen in the sky, and that Sosostris commissioned, or ordered rather, his guards to find out the source for these objects, which apparently landed at the far end of the canyon somewhere. We don't know exactly where this. And after 3 days, they returned and said they could find nothing. So when you have reports like this going back many thousands of years, he's an expert. Yes, I'm just curious, like everybody else. I really defer to Dr. Friedman in his discussion of this very interesting subject. So I'm not going to be talking about flying saucers,
right,
or ufology when I'm speaking in Fort Wayne. But still, they're more complimentary than people used to imagine.
Okay. I just got a message in the chat room that people in there are not hearing the player for some reason that I can't possibly figure out what it is. All of my instruments are showing that it's lighting up. I did a test before I called you, and it took on the hard drive version, but I don't want you to be talking into the air if we're having a malfunction, because you're just wasting your breath.
Uh-huh.
And I don't want to do that to you. So let me check with these people in the chat room real quick to see, because I told them to refresh this page and try again and see if it's working now. There is one thing that might have went wrong, although it should not have had a problem. Nothing's impossible, I don't suppose. And that is, before my show, I realized that this thing was auto-starting, and I know it freezes up some people's computers. So I went in there and set it to false, and it had a 0 setting instead of true or false. And maybe it doesn't want to read that, particular false setting. Maybe it wanted a number instead. So while he's in there trying that, I'm going to switch this back to 0 and save it and see if that don't bring it back online for them. I'm sorry about this, Frank. I didn't see this coming.
No, I understand these technical things happen all the time.
I'm typing to them in the chat room now. Okay, he's refreshing his page. He disappeared out of the chat room. Like I said, I usually don't have this problem with my equipment. In fact, you've been on my show several times now yourself, and you know we haven't never had a problem with the equipment.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
But then, too, sometimes equipment can get funny.
Well,
okay, one guy says he can hear me fine. It was just Les. It's a possibility it wasn't even my equipment. It could have been something with Les's equipment over there, and here I am worrying about mine all this time. Okay, well, if one guy can hear, I'm pretty sure that it's in the other guy's equipment. So why don't we continue on with where we were at and get down to talking about your book. Now, was there anything else, though, before we move on to your book, that you wanted to tell us about this new museum event that's coming up?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you much more about it. It's a kind of an art and anthropological museum that's opening. And I don't know much about it. The museum is still under construction, as a matter of fact, but they're hoping they better have it finished by next September when we have the conference there. Or it's not really a conference. I keep saying that, but it's more like a public meeting, presentations, lectures, that sort of thing. And there'll be about half a dozen speakers there. I don't know everybody else that will be talking, but I know that Dr. Friedman will be there, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Now, getting down to your book, one of the things that I read in your book that, well, it was in right there in the very beginning that really stood out to me because it was news to me. Your book was the first I ever heard of the aquatic ape theory. Now, as I understood it, it works through the same form as evolution works, basically. But I thought maybe you could tell us a little something more about it because I don't want to misexplain it.
Oh, that's all right. No, the aquatic ape hypothesis, some call a hypothesis or a theory, goes back really to the father of evolution. And we're not talking about Charles Darwin here. We're talking about the first true scientist. His name was Anaximander, and he lived during the 6th century BC in Athens. And he proposed the basic outline for human evolution, which was really well adapted. It was very similar, basically, to Charles Darwin's later work in the 19th century. But the interesting thing about Anaximander is that he also said that human beings spend some time of their evolution in or near water, and that this proximity to water helped to shape their very particular human evolution. Well, that idea was very popular but the Greco-Roman, that idea was lost. And the Bible was put in its place, and so the Bible was used, Genesis, of course, was used to explain how human beings came to be. And it wasn't until Darwin proposed the theory of human evolution in the 19th century that we now have the evolutionary theory. And that evolutionary theory states that about 6 million years ago, our ancestors lived in the trees. They lived a very happy and productive life there. It was an easy life. They had everything they needed. And then a little less or a little more than 2 million years ago, deforestation set in on a massive scale and forced our ancestors to leave the trees for a life on the savanna plain. And this was a very difficult and very dangerous way to live. So our ancestors were not too successful at first. They were scavengers and later became hunters. And it is through this process of the necessity to hunt successfully, according to the very basic evolutionary theory now, that we developed into human beings. We became upright, we are told, in order to see further and to carry things in our hands. And we developed communication skills to be better hunters, and so on and so forth until we finally evolved into the creature that we are now. I found that this basic story seems to me correct. However, there are some real troubling things about our own bodies that are not explained by this theory. I'm not the discoverer of this, by the way. There have been many other scientists who have also been troubled by Darwin's theory in some of these particulars. And one of the most troubling is human fat. We have fat, we develop fat on our bodies, which is totally different than the fat used by all other primates. That's what we all are, gorillas, chimpanzees, and human beings. We're all primates. But all other primates have fat in very sparse measure, and the fat is usually around certain organs to help protect them. We use fat as a warming device that do have fat, and exactly the same as our own. It's known as blubber. Are those mammals that evolved on land and then continued their development in the sea. We're talking about the dolphin for one example, or the whale is another example. The ancestors of both the dolphin and the whale were originally dog-like animals that lived on land. About 60 million years ago, they decided or were forced to leave the terrestrial environment to adapt an aquatic life, so much so that they left the land forever. And in doing so, they had to develop means of keeping warm, and they developed blubber. The other thing that we do not share in common with other primates is the use of hair on our bodies. We have as many hairs on our bodies as a chimpanzee does, except that our hairs have become much thinner and finer. The tracks or the patterns of hair growth on a human being do not share anything in common with the tracks or hair growth of chimpanzees, which are closely related to us. We share 95% of our DNA with chimpanzees. They have 23 chromosomes. We have 24. We're very close relatives. Chimpanzees can be taught to speak a few human words. There are some chimpanzee gestures that have not been taught to them that are the same as ours. For example, chimpanzees will console one another when one of them is, say, one chimpanzee is particularly sad or in mourning. Another chimpanzee will console it by tapping it gently on its shoulder. Well, that's a very human trait. We refer to it as a pat on the back. There are numerous other similarities. But for all of those similarities, there are these fundamental differences. And this hair pattern, this hair growth is remarkable because our hair pattern and growth, which does not resemble a chimpanzee's at all, is identical to sea mammals. The hair pattern that develops, especially from the back of the nape of the neck and develops over the back, is identical to the water effect as it ripples over the bodies of other sea creatures. I'm thinking about manatees, for example, and porpoises.
Right.
And when I became curious about these things, I had no theory about it at all, but it seemed very strange. Especially, we're told that we develop sweat glands, unlike, by the way, any other primate. We develop sweat glands in order to cool us down on the African veldt when we were hunting. Well, no other primate has done that. In order to keep warm, we supposedly have developed fat, and then to cool down, we have these sweat glands, some 75,000 sweat glands. This is a very cumbersome and not an efficient way to keep warm or to cool off, and yet they're found in every other sea mammal. They also develop sweat glands. We are able to cry tears. We're able to weep. Chimpanzees do not. Dolphins do. We also exhibit gills. This was kind of a shock for me to realize, but in the early stages of childbirth, every human develops gill slits, and that these gill slits eventually become they atrophy and vanish. Or infant develops gill slits. We do. 7 to 9% of human beings worldwide develop webbing between the fingers and the toes. These are
in fact, you showed pictures of that in the book.
Over from our yes, that's right. That we have. There are photographs that are showing a webbing that takes place, and these are not the result. It's webbing that takes place in 7 to 9% of the human population. is not some anomalous freak. It's a recessive trait. It's left over. Matter of fact, we still have webbing between the average hand. The average human hand still has webbing between the fingers, which are not exhibited on any other primate. They do not have webbing. And the most obvious webbing is between the thumb and the index finger. That is a real swath of webbing. And these traits are multiplied by numerous others that are associated not with primates, but with sea mammals. So I began to investigate this theory and found out that some of the greatest thinkers in biology, some of the greatest biologists, have been advocates of the aquatic ape hypothesis, but they don't talk about it too openly because it is severely criticized by mainstream biologists. I'm thinking especially of a gentleman, his name was Max Westenhofer, who was a very brilliant Berlin biologist who first proposed this theory in the 1920s when he began to notice all these. And he suggested that human beings at one point in their evolution began actually evolving into a sea creature. That what had happened was our primate ancestors, just exactly as we're told, were successful scavengers and hunters, but the environment changed radically so that their dry land environment was suddenly reduced and marginalized by the encroaching sea. And that as this happened, our ancestors were presented with a challenge to either adapt or die. And that is the mechanism of evolution. You have to either adapt or go extinct. And our ancestors began adapting to an aquatic environment. The sea then retreated, and our ancestors returned to the land. This happened, I believe, this is, in my book, it's called Before Atlantis. I think this is perhaps, I may be wrong, it may be its only original contribution to this theory, and that is that human beings, I'm convinced, not only did they go through an aquatic phase, I think they went through several aquatic phases. We may still be going through an aquatic phase at this very moment because there are millions of human beings who live in close approximation to the sea or to a watery environment. And I think that the force of evolution did not stop when Homo sapiens appeared. I think that the course of evolution is an ongoing process and that we are still bound up in evolution. It's not an observable process in the short term, but I think that we're still undergoing it. One of the things that I think indicates that we're still undergoing an evolutionary process and that we still are being influenced by an aquatic phase now is something that swimmers know, professional swimmers. Professional swimmers know that if they spend an inordinate amount of time in the water, if they're spending like most of their time swimming to get ready for the Olympics or something like that, you would think that because of all the calories that you burn up, and there is no exercise that is more thorough than swimming. Nothing comes close to it. You would think that all those calories you're burning up, that you would have a svelte body, you'd be an absolutely slender person, but that's not the case. That professional swimmers put on tremendous amounts of weight, and this is even though they will diet very carefully. They will add on blubber. This is known especially amongst populations like Hawaiians. Hawaiians are known as big-boned people who have a propensity to put on a lot of fat, and this is not because they're self-indulgent or they overeat. It's because they spend a great deal of time in the water. And this is an indication that our ancestors were on the way to be assuming a blubbery body, just the same way that dolphins have. So I think that our unique evolution, and this is the conclusion from this book, although I don't really state it. I hope that the reader can come to the same conclusion, but for our listeners in the radio audience, that the thrust of Before Atlantis is that we as human beings are not only primate, but are also aquatic, that we are a combination of these forces on both land and water that have created us and made us into a very unique species, a very unique animal, I should say. We are both aquatic and primate. This probably, I feel, explains our human behavior.
That very well could be true. One thing I'd have to wonder about it is there any connection between the sinking of Lemuria and Atlantis and our aquatic phase?
I found a really interesting connection, and that I'm going to sort of work backwards from this one. There is a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and this tradition is more than just a custom. This is something that is enshrined in the Tibetan history. It's sort of like a mythic history. They don't write history in the same way as we do, but nonetheless, they preserve those things that are important to them in these mythic histories. And they say, the Tibetan histories talk of a culture bearer whose name was Miwaki, M-I-W-O-C-H-E, Miwaki. And Miwaki is regarded as this culture hero who appears in the year 1917 BC. That's the year that they have enshrined in this history of Miwaki. In 1917 BC, we are told, Miwaki appeared in the Himalayas, and he brought the wisdom of a distant land which they refer to as Mu, M-U. This is actually in the Tibetan records. They refer to it as Mu. An entire people are referred to. As a matter of fact, the Tibetan people themselves claim descent partially from the Mu, which is the name also of the people who inhabited this land before it sank into the Pacific Ocean. And Miwaki, when he brought this great wisdom of this high kingdom into Tibet, it helped to form the basis of Tibetan Buddhism. And Miwaki is described as being this handsome, very brilliant man who was unusual because he had webbed fingers and toes. Kind of interesting. So if we go back from that, from Miwaki, we go back now to one of the seminal events that has ever happened on planet Earth, which is not too well known, not too well talked about, although National Geographic did a big splash about it some years ago. And that is the eruption of the world's most powerful volcano. Geologists do not know of any volcanic event which can eclipse or come close to this volcanic event that took place 75,000 years ago. That's a really interesting time because at that time, 75,000 years ago, we now know through genetic research that there were approximately 2 million human beings around the world. Now, these were not modern human beings, all of them. Some of them were Homo sapiens. Some of them were other variations of Homo erectus. At that time, there were many human species coming and going, too many that have not even been categorized yet. And these were variations, experiments, as though nature was experimenting with the type of human to create. So we're talking about modern humans, but not Homo sapiens sapiens. He did not yet appear, but Homo sapiens. So if you went back 75,000 years ago, you would see people that looked pretty much like us, and then you'd see others that did not look pretty much like us, some strange types. But there were 2 million of us at that time. When Mount Toba exploded, and that's the name of this volcano, 75,000 years ago, it was so devastating, it so completely changed the climate of planet Earth that it wiped out whole species of animals and plants, that the amount of material, volcanic ash that was extruded into the atmosphere totally changed it. And our species was not immune, it suffered also, and in the wink of an eye, 2 million human beings were reduced to about 2,000 breeding pairs. We now know that there were at most